We're going to start as Muslims do in the name of God. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. May the peace and blessings of God be upon every single one of you. My name is Hamza Tzortzis, and I'm here to talk to you about why the belief in the Creator is rational. Now, before I do that, I want to thank the university. I want to thank you for facilitating this event, because I think it's very important in the 21st century, in our current social, political space, that we actually talk to one another in the spirit of tolerance, dialogue, and compassion. And I think it's very important to talk about the differences, because human beings are going to come together on their commonalities anyway. It's a given. But the differences are the basis for anxiety, the differences are the basis for hatred sometimes, and the differences are the basis for fear. We need to start talking about these differences, because once you talk about these differences and you show that they're relevant, you show that they're human, you show that they're valued, and you show that they're rational in some way, then those differences will, God willing, be diminished. So it's very important to even talk about these type of topics. Yes, there is going to be a group of people that fundamentally disagree with what I'm going to say today. No problem. You can disagree all you like. You can agree all you like. You can be in the middle. You can be sitting on the fence. In fact, you can be in the fence. It's not an issue. The point is, we need to engage in this way in order to clarify these differences, show the human element behind them, and hopefully we do that in the spirit of tolerance, compassion, and dialogue. And isn't that what university is all about, really? Isn't that what uni is all about? So I want to clear that so we know how to engage with one another. Everybody okay with this so far? We're good? We're cool? Good. So, God's existence. The belief in a creator, is it rational? Now, before I get into our main argument, I want to talk about the concept of rationality. You see, as human beings, we generally believe we're rational. Or we hold the assumption, the presupposition, we hold the idea that we are rational, that we can infer, we can deduce, we can have rational insights. We can see into a conclusion. We make rational decisions. We look at the evidence and we try to find some kind of connection between them. We observe, we ponder, we reflect, we write poetry, right? So we're rational human beings. We are rational. Some of us are not as rational as others, and there's degrees of rationality for sure, but we like to claim, generally speaking, as a human species, that we are rational. We have rational faculties that we trust, and these rational faculties produce true beliefs. Right? If we didn't have that assumption, by the way, we can never ever do science. You can never be at university. It would be impossible. Because the whole point of science, the whole point of university, the whole point of discovery and progress is to have some knowledge claims. I'm not saying we're going to know everything. I'm not saying these knowledge claims are going to be static. No. But we have some knowledge claims. We can't run away from the fact that we have to postulate. We have to make an argument. For example, something very simple but crude. 1 plus 1 is equal to 5. 2. 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. Like, no one's going to disagree with the idea that the real world is actually real. Okay, fine, there are some idealists, but we have a kind of realist position, especially engaging with science. We believe in external causal connections, right? It's not just all in the brain. You know, we're not a brain in a vat on Venus, and there are probes in our brain making us feel and think what we're feeling and thinking right now. not many of us are going to believe that we're in the Matrix. I don't know if you've seen that movie before, right? Have you seen the Matrix? Good, epic film, right? So, we make some postulations. Now, here is something that may blow your mind away. Given the fact that, generally speaking, most of us hold the assumption that we have reliable cognitive faculties that produce reliable true beliefs, then we should raise the question, how can we make sense of that? How can we ground that? How can we understand that? How can we account for that? And I would argue humbly, and you could disagree with me, we could have a discussion, a dialogue, no problem. But I would humbly argue that if you are a theist, someone who believes in a creator, you're not going to have a problem. However, if you're an atheist, you're in intellectual trouble. Right? This is my position, based on evidence. I'm actually doing these type of studies at the University of London. I'm a research student in philosophy, and one of my research pieces last year was on this topic. So we could unravel that. And it could be totally wrong, no problem. If you have a good argument, I'll accept it today. So, coming back to the point. And if you're an atheist, you're in intellectual trouble if you believe you have reliable cognitive faculties that produce reliable true beliefs. Why? Before I tell you why, let me tell you what I mean by atheism in this point. Because atheism is not a monolith, just like Muslims are not a monolith. And I don't like to otherize. Otherization is the basis for extremism. Whoever otherizes has issues. We don't want to otherize anybody. And what does otherization mean? It means there's a group, and that group is negative, and everyone in that group is all the same. This is not the Islamic tradition. This is not the Islamic tradition. Allah says in the Quran, chapter 3, verse 113, people are not the same. They are not the same. Meaning there are upright people in other groups. Right? So we can't say there's another group, and they're all the same, and they're all bad. This is otherization. This is a binary understanding of the world. And this, for me, creates an ideological hardness in one's heart. And they basically see the world as binaries, and they can't connect with one another. So, this is why I like to define things, right? So, what I mean by atheism from this point of view is someone who believes that there is no divine, there is no supernatural, and everything can be explained by physical processes. This is what you call in academia as a philosophical naturalist. Okay? So philosophical naturalism is the idea that there is no divine, there is no supernatural, and everything can be explained by physical processes. Now, not all atheists agree with that. Yes, probably the majority, like Richard Dawkins in his book, The God Delusion, on page 14, he alludes to this point, and others. But there are some atheists, like the philosopher of the mind, Professor David Chalmers. He's not really a philosophical naturalist, okay? And that's why I want to be nuanced here, just to give a kind of just understanding of these points. So the kind of atheism that I'm going to be attacking today, what I mean by attacking here is intellectual, compassionate attack here, not like, saying anyone's evil or anything, right? This is an intellectual discussion. So the type of atheism that I'm going to be addressing today is the atheism that is philosophical naturalism. That there is no divine, there is no supernatural, everything can be explained by physical processes. Now, here's the problem. If you're a philosophical naturalist, right, which is generally speaking mainstream atheism, if you're a philosophical naturalist, you cannot account for your assumption. You can't account for your assumption that you have reliable cognitive faculties that produce reliable true beliefs. Why? Because the naturalist, generally speaking, adopts the Darwinian mechanism to explain what makes one human. And if what makes one human is the ability to produce true beliefs as a result of rational faculties that are reliable, then we have a big problem. Because what does the Darwinian mechanism say? Well, the Darwinian mechanism, via natural selection, basically says that we evolved, okay, which is not controversial, faculties were as a result of this evolution. As a result of natural selection, selecting particular traits, in this case, reliable cognitive faculties that produce reliable true beliefs, and that was conducive to our survival and reproduction. So the general argument here is, well, natural selection, yes, we know it's all about survival and reproduction, but that's not a problem, because the more you know about your environment, the truth about your environment, you're going to survive. So the strategy here is that there is a link between survival and truth. You have to prove that link. If you want to adopt the Darwinian mechanism as an explanation for your reliable cognitive faculties that produce reliable true beliefs, if you're going to adopt that, then you have to show that there is a link between survival and truth. But you know what, ladies and gentlemen? There is no necessary link. And philosophers and scientists accept this. There's no necessary link between truth and survival. Here's an example. I can be someone who goes into a jungle and I can say, all fungi are poisonous. All fungi are poisonous. What happens? Do I die or do I survive? I survive. But is it true that all fungi are poisonous? No. White butter mushrooms are really good for you, right? So the point here is, someone could make they could adopt the false belief that all fungi are poisonous and it leads to the survival. In actual fact, to make such generalizations is more conducive to survival. Because if you have to be very specific with your beliefs, very ignorant with your beliefs, that carries a biological cost. As the academic James Sage, he addresses this in one of his academic papers on this issue. If you have to really think about things, you don't have much time in the jungle. You got some predators that are running behind you. You need to cover your posterior. You need to get out, man. You can't think about, let's be nuanced here. What kind of mushroom? Can I eat this one? Maybe this one with a bit of vinegar. If I don't have vinegar, it's going to be poisonous. Or this one's have to boil to 100 degrees. That's too much of a biological cost. And natural selection wouldn't use that because you're using resources. Your brain needs a hell of a lot of glucose. Right? When I'm doing something, and I think sugar's really bad for you, correlations to cancer, really bad for you and stuff, but when I'm really zooming in on a piece of work, I need my chocolate. You know what I'm saying? I need my chocolate, I need my sweets, and now I've discovered maple syrup in oats, what do you call it? Oatmeal, that is the way forward. Salute Canada, right? Maple syrup and oatmeal is the way forward, alright? And I'm proud of it, because by the way, my brother-in-law, Louis, he's Canadian, right? So I have a connection, family connection to Canada. So, where were we? Right, yes. So there's no link between survival and truth. So there's a problem here. How can we account for our reliable cognitive faculties that produce reliable true beliefs if there's no necessary link between survival, natural selection, survival, and truth? Because we could have evolved, guys. We could have evolved based on falsehood. That maybe natural selection selected unreliable cognitive faculties that produced unreliable true beliefs, just like in the scenario I just gave you. But then the conversation continues. The strategy continues for the philosophical naturalist that uses Darwinism as an explanation for what makes us human. They would say, okay, Hamza, you're right. The philosophers are right. These academics are right. There is no link between truth and survival and truth. However, we are going to give you something that's intellectually robust. It's called evolutionary reliabilism. Tough word to say, yeah? Evolutionary reliabilism, yeah? What is evolutionary reliabilism? Basically, evolutionary reliabilism says, yes, there is no necessary link between truth and survival. However, it is highly likely that natural selection selected reliable cognitive faculties that produce reliable true beliefs. And it's more likely that natural selection selected those traits over selecting unreliable cognitive faculties that produce false beliefs. So that's their strategy. However, to make such a claim, you need some empirical evidence. You can't just pull out a claim out of the rabbit's hat just like that. You know, we don't believe in magic from that point of view. Intellectual magic. Oh, here's an idea, you have to believe in it. No, we have to have some empirical evidence. You can't just adopt it as true. Why have the epistemic privilege? Why take that privilege? On what basis? Since evolution can't even explain language properly, can't even explain psychology, can't even explain what I mean by psychology, meaning that we have inner subjective conscious states. Can't explain the hard problem of consciousness, the mystery of consciousness, right? So why have the epistemic privilege to claim, oh, here's an argument, it's more likely? On what evidence? And when you look at the evidence, brothers and sisters and friends, the empirical evidence, we're in big trouble. Because there is no substantial empirical evidence to show that natural selection, it was more likely that it selected reliable cognitive faculties that produce true beliefs over unreliable cognitive faculties that produce false beliefs. And there's lots of studies. For example, one particular study is a study on perception. And they use evolutionary game theory and they use genetic algorithms to show that in actual fact it was more conducive to survival and reproduction for us to have false perceptions. This is thoroughly, if this study is true, this thoroughly undermines the naturalist position. Because they used evolutionary game theory, genetic algorithms to show that our perceptions, that natural selection, it would be conducive to survival and reproduction to select perceptions that were false. Crazy. So there's no empirical evidence. So what does this mean? This doesn't refute evolution. That's not the goal here, by the way. The goal here is not to refute evolution. The goal here is to show if you adopt this position, then follow through logically with its consequences. And given the lack of empirical evidence, given the philosophical exercise that we've just discussed thus far, you have to be a skeptic, not an atheist. And what do I mean by skeptic? Philosophical skepticism. You have to be intellectually just and follow through the implications of this perspective and say there is no knowledge. That undermines the atheist position in my view, because they can't point their finger at religious discourse anymore. They can't say this is bad. Oh, really? Is that knowledge claim? But you have to be a skeptic if you adopt this position. You can't say there is no God as a knowledge claim. You can't say religion is irrational as a knowledge claim, because you have to be a skeptic based on what we just discussed. With all due respect, if you're a philosophical naturalist and you claim you have reliable cognitive faculties that produce reliable true beliefs, then frankly you're an intellectual squatter. You just sorry man. You just go into the house, you're squatting in the house of reason. You don't have the keys, my friend. You don't have the keys, right? And this is an intellectual position. So, this is the first half of our discussion. I want to open questions now for the first half. And then I'll give you the second half. Because you know why? You're definitely going to forget what I said. Because it's all like reliabilism, it's all a bit complicated, right? So now your mind is fresh. Let's have a discussion. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Hello, you made a claim. I'm not sure if it was your claim or if you were just laying the groundwork for the philosophical natural position, but you refuted the link between truth and survival. Was that your claim that you were making?
I'm making the claim there is no necessary link between truth and survival.
Okay, so to elaborate on that then, when you say something like all mushrooms are poisonous, a lie, which leads to greater survival, could it be a problem of level of analysis? Could it be a problem of level of analysis where you have this untruth nested within a larger order truth, which you went on to elaborate on, which is, well, sometimes you have to say something that's a lie in the moment to ensure survival in the long term, which would be a greater truth at a larger order analysis. Tell a lie in the moment to preserve the species in the long term, which is falling more in line with
Yeah, that's a slightly circular, because if you know it's a lie, then you have reliable cognitive faculties. So if you know something's a lie, and you have to tell a lie in order for a higher order truth, then, well, if you're telling a lie, you know it's a lie, well, that means it's a truth, because you know it's a lie. Therefore, you're already presuming that thing which you want to prove.
What's the truth behind saying to somebody, don't eat mushrooms, they're all poisonous? What's the truth that you're reaching for when you say that?
See, what we mean by truth here is what we say is, say there was a primitive stage of our development as human beings. Truth here means a representation of reality, of the actual state of affairs. That's what we mean by truth.
Do you think that's something that you can actually reach, or can you get closer and closer approximations of, but never quite touch the absolute truth completely?
Yeah, that's a different discussion. Absolutely, yeah, for sure. We could talk about epistemology later. That's not a problem. It could be the case that we have approximations towards truth. But then after, we're going to get in a big discussion on how do we define truth. Coherentism, foundationalism, all of that stuff. But coming back to the original topic itself, if someone has unreliable cognitive faculties, and due to those unreliable cognitive faculties, they produce false beliefs because they don't have the kind of architecture, mental architecture, to adopt beliefs that are representation of the state of affairs, right? Given that can also lead to survival, then we have to be skeptical about the assumption that we have reliable cognitive faculties. Because if you believe you have reliable cognitive faculties that do produce reliable true beliefs, if that's the case, then how do we ground it? Because it's an assumption. And I would say, if you adopt the Darwinian mechanism, it negates that very assumption, or at least leads to skepticism. And there's nothing wrong with having assumptions. Everything has assumptions, even philosophy, even in science, right? But can you have an assumption that is denied by that domain of knowledge? Right? Imagine I had an assumption that the world is made out of cheese, but my domain of knowledge is always disproving that assumption. I can't hold that assumption anymore. So what I'm saying is, the philosophical naturalist needs to be consistent. That's what I'm saying. And that consistency, in my view, is that they should adopt skepticism, which really undermines the kind of heat of the atheist argument. Let it linger, we carry on talking, it's not a problem, yeah? So I know these are very, trust me, when I studied this topic in the first couple of days, I was like, what's going on, yeah? So I'm not going to expect you guys to be like, I know Kung Fu, the Matrix. Remember when he put the thing on the back of his head? It doesn't work that way. Just let it linger, and then you can put your hand up again. Any other questions?
If you have any questions, put your hand up. See.
Any other questions what we've discussed thus far? Yes, there's one of them.
So first of all, I want to thank you for arranging this event. So this might be a stupid question, but I want to know what's your views on why we develop these brain mechanisms that we can have the leads of our own. So I just want to hear your point of view on that.
So to say that a bit more slow, if you don't mind.
Oh sure. So when you talk about how natural selection happens, so I see animals all around, so they don't have consciousness or anything else, but they're still surviving. So we humans, we can have the same thing, but why do you think we know the beliefs?
Tyra.
Yeah, so why do you think we have this complex brain mechanism to we can have some beliefs?
Yeah, good. So that's good. You're basically allowing me to conclude effectively the question. Thank you. So why does theism make sense of this? Because, well, I can't speak for all types of theism, but the Islamic theism is, Islamic theism accepts the fact that there are physical causes in the universe, and they explain how things happen. Islamic tradition never denied this ever. This is why Ibn al-Haytham, in I think the 10th century or something, he wrote the book on optics. And if you read the works of David C. Lindbergh, he's a historian of science, he says Ibn al-Haytham, he was one of the key foundations to the modern scientific method. Go read the book for yourself, you see. Right? So we never had this issue about understanding how things happen. But this particular question is not really a scientific question per se. For me, it's more of a metaphysical question. It's a metaphysical question. And from a metaphysics point of view, theism explains the fact that we have rational faculties because there's a eternal, all-aware, all-knowing being that created human beings in the universe, and it just makes sense, and it follows that the Creator created human beings with the ability to have rational faculties that produce true beliefs. That's not a problem. That's actually quite basic to understand as a metaphysic, right? But if you adopt philosophical naturalism, which is a philosophical position, and whether we like it or not, everyone has a philosophy. There's no philosophy-free idea, even atheism has a metaphysical baggage, yeah? If you adopt that position, then it's going to be very hard to justify the fact that you have rational faculties if you adopt the Darwinian mechanism. So for theists, it's not a problem. It's not an issue at all. I mean, even the Quran tells us that we were created with minds, right, with insight, with the ability to do tadabbur, which means pondering, tafakkur, reflection. These things are not an issue from a theistic point of view. Right? Yes, sir.
You made a good point by saying that human beings are with rational faculty. Where rational beings. What if the rational faculty is impaired?
Impaired?
Yeah. You know what I mean by that word, impaired? Cognitive impairment?
Yes.
And something wrong. Is that possible?
Sure. I mean,
what would be what would be said by somebody with that rational faculty impairment?
I don't know.
Well, that may be where the problem starts.
Maybe with just the result of lots of primates having cognitive impairments. That's why maybe the world is so crazy, man. Maybe. I'm not saying that's the case, but we could explore that. But what's very interesting, just to anchor off your question, because I can't really answer the question directly, but I'm not a psychologist, but to anchor off your question, it is very interesting that even in philosophy and cognitive science, they discuss cognitive biases. Right? We have cognitive biases. We get things wrong, even when we think we're getting them right. Even in the scientific method, in the philosophy of science, there's something called theory-ladenness. We presume a theory to be true, and we're seeing that the theory is working by looking at the evidence because we have that presupposition, right? But then we forget about the other evidences that actually slightly, antagonize that theory. What about this cognitive bias of egocentrism, which is my way of seeing things is the only way of seeing things, right? Which is the cause of a lot of issues, disasters, problems, So, absolutely, we're a bunch of cognitive biases, man. We might as well go home. Let's have a pizza, man. Forget this discussion. We're all cognitive impaired. I don't know. Maybe. Baker?
For that reason, for someone, 1 plus 1, as you said,
It's 5, maybe.
may not be 2.
It might be 11.
1 plus 1 may be 1. I repeat, for that reason, if there is an impairment with the faculty that to say is rational,
Sure.
it is possible for somebody to say 1 plus 1 is not 2.
Sure.
1 plus 1 is 1. And you may even get somebody who will say 1 plus 1 is 5.
Well, I think one physicist once said that. But yeah, so, any other questions particularly on this topic? Well, I'm going to move to the next half of the presentation. There's one over there. Yeah, sure.
Who is it? Put your hands up. Okay.
Well, a lot of times with science, they always say that it was a rare chance that it happened. So what's to stop someone fighting for naturalistic atheism to say that it wasn't some sort of genetic miracle in a way that it happened? Like, You know, I mean, they always have that rare chance, like the universe was created by a Big Bang, and there was just all things fit, and then they have multiverses to explain everything. So you can also use the same argument when it comes to this evolution.
Yeah, well,
that it just worked, and that's why we're here today with this kind of thought.
Sure. Well, in this context, the door swings both ways. And that's what they have to understand. The logical door doesn't just go this way, it also goes that way. So if you're saying, well, you know, we can't explain naturalistically via the Darwinian mechanism, via natural selection, why we have reliable cognitive faculties that produce reliable true beliefs, the only way of explaining it is because there must be some kind of chance thing going on.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So just reverse the logic. Just like we would believe it was chance that it was also wrong. It was chance that you didn't have reliable cognitive faculties. That's the point. But they won't reason this way because you have to basically be justified in the probability that you're accepting, right? Why one over the other? You can't just merely say, oh, I'm going to do this because it suits my worldview. You can't do that, man. You can't have your cake and eat it, man. See? So what I would say in this position is, well, why do you think is more likely? And you think it's just literally based on some kind of crazy chance, then, well, you could explain anything with your crazy chance, right? Yeah. Right? You could explain anything. Like, you know what? I don't think my mother is my mother anymore. I think she was a pink rhino that was born on Pluto and flew here in a giant feather. Hamza Tzortzis, you're crazy. But there's a chance. Right? You can just explain everything. You know, I believe God exists and the Quran is a miracle and the Prophet Muhammad upon him be peace is the final messenger and there's a hell and a heaven and you have to worship God. Because there's a chance. And I would be justified based on their own epistemic, right? Based on their own framework. You see? So always follow through the logical implications of someone's position. Don't get like, oh my God, they have a question. Find out what it is and find out the logical implications of that particular question. Let's take maybe one or two more questions on this topic and we go to the next half of the presentation.
So I like when you talk about that there might and might not be links between survival and truth. So what happens, I just want to know your opinion about this. For example, Albert Einstein, with only equations, found out that black holes existed and behaved in a certain way. And it was just a formula and mathematical formulas. But a couple of months ago, we actually saw a photo of a black hole. So in that case, before that photo, there was no link between the actual truth and the survival. But after the world saw the photo of a black hole, there was now something that made not everyone, but the majority of people think like, oh, okay, so this might now be true. And Albert Einstein said, if we fell inside a black hole, we might not survive. So based on that, there was people that said, okay, then we really might not survive, you see? So what stops humanity or the rational thinking to stop thinking about well, there are things that can be actually proven. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I see your question. I don't see how it relates to this because Einstein's mathematical equations were not anything to do with survival or reproduction. He actually believed the equation to be true, and then his equations basically correlate with our observations. And this is a little bit different from surviving in an evolutionary context, that natural selection selected traits that was conducive, that was fitness enhancing. It's slightly different. If I get from your question is that, oh, but the more we progress, we may find out scientifically. Good question. However, I think that's problematic as well. I'll tell you why. Because science, in my view, can't really address this question. Why? Because science has the assumption, you have to start with the assumption that you have reliable cognitive faculties that can produce reliable true beliefs. To try and now scientifically prove it, what are you doing? You're arguing in a circle, you see. So this remains for me a kind of philosophical exercise, right? So you can't argue in a circle. So, but it was a good question.
Thank you. Okay, I got a question here.
So, as you stated that there's a difference between survival and truth. So, can you explain that what is truth according to you? And what are the points on you about what is the truth according to you? And why does it need to be rational?
Yeah, so that's a long topic. The use of the term truth in this context was a representation of the state of affairs. Okay, that was the use in this context. But what I believe to be true, this is, you want another lecture, we'll be here all day. So I personally believe that the Islamic tradition is a rational tradition, but it's also very deeply existential and spiritual. For example, our kind of first principle or metaphysic about the human being is that we have a natural disposition. This is called the fitrah in Islam. The natural disposition contains some form of knowledge. You can call it primary knowledge, right? I'm going to use the board. Apologies for anyone who can't take the scratching of the talk. I get a bit crazy, but I'll be fine hopefully. So just imagine, I'm going to try and do a heart, okay? Sorry for my bad art. So let the heart represent what you call the fitrah, which is the innate disposition, okay? In the innate disposition, you have two forms of primary knowledge, okay? The first form is God, that He is a reality. You could say the underlying basic concept of God, that there is a creator, and that He's worthy of extensive praise. Now what's very interesting in the psychology of religion, in cognitive science, all of that stuff, there's quite a few studies that support this kind of understanding, this kind of default position, this innate position of having this part of what makes us human. But that's not, conclusive evidence, but it's quite supporting. But anyway, so the Islamic tradition believes that every human being has this within them. In actual fact, if you see a study that was published in 2016 by Deborah Kellerman and others, I think they came to the conclusion that even atheists have kind of intuitive responses that would attribute design to things. Would you believe it, right? And this is cross-cultural, even in atheist societies like, I think, Finland. Check out the study for yourself. So, but what happens over time is that the fitrah becomes clouded, right? That's what we believe. Like your every human birth, we don't have the Christian understanding that, you're born in sin. Every human birth is born in this type of goodness, right? But what happens is it gets clouded over time because of parenting. Parents corrupt people's nature. That's what Islam says, basically. Not to believe that you shouldn't obey your parents, but they have the capacity to refine or to corrupt. Like every human being has a capacity to refine, to improve, or to corrupt. So there's a corruption process going on. Maybe it's systemic effects. If you read the works of Zimbardo, the Lucifer effect, right? Sometimes, who's watched The Joker? Yeah, that's a powerful film. This guy who's got mental health illness, taking care of his mom who's got mental health problems, he's trying to make a living. Society's beating him up, The system is crushing him. Then he breaks. Not to say that, it's justified, but there is this kind of link between the individual and society and individual. I don't think this kind of hardcore liberalism is true. It's ontologically false. Because if it was true, then come on, man, we're dependent on each other. I mean, my birth, I didn't catapult out of my mother's womb with a briefcase and a tie, for God's sake, yeah? Me being here today was as a result of variables outside of my control. I have to respect that. We're dependent. We're not individuals in that way. We're individual. And the more we realize that, the more we'll chill out and take care of each other, right? As the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom he said, the best amongst you are those who benefit mankind. Anyway, so, we have a clouded disposition. And I believe there are different ways to awaken, to uncloud the disposition, to awaken the truth within. And the way to uncloud it could be with rational arguments. But it's not an end, it's just a means. It could be by buying someone a pizza, being nice. It could be getting them to think and reflect. It could be spirituality, it could be positive or negative experiences. They could be spiritual windows of opportunity that they could reach the divine and come close to Him. So the point is, we don't have an epistemic prison. There's only one way to truth. Use these kind of abstract rational arguments. Really, yeah? We wouldn't even live our life that way, yeah? So the point is, it's a very dynamic approach to the human being. So what I believe to be true is that there is a God, and we're here to worship Him, which means that He's worthy of to be known, to be loved, to be obeyed, and that includes to be humble before the divine, and to direct the internal and external acts of worship to God alone. The internal acts of worship include love and reliance, and the external acts of worship include, giving charity, smiling, prayer, all of these things. And this is the essence of Islam. And the way to know how to worship God is by following the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace. And that basic truth is already within us. God, and that He's worthy of extensive praise, which is the key to worship. But we get our disposition gets clouded, and there are different ways to uncloud the innate disposition to awaken the truth within. I know this sounds like Jedi yoga stuff, but it's true. So that's my position on truth and everything else. It's a summary, but hopefully I'll answer the question. Any other questions on what we discussed thus far? Anyone new? Because I have to finish the rest of the presentation. No? Okay, good.
Yeah, so there are some philosophies that say that when you think about something, that makes it automatically real or true. So when an atheist say that they don't believe in God, do you think that when he say that he's going to make it real? Do you think that's true? Or
What kind of philosophy is that? Do you know the name of that philosophy?
No, I just.
Well, there is an idea that just by virtue of you believing it, it's true. That's a very dangerous idea. I mean, what if I believed that I was the master of the universe and anything I did was good by virtue of me doing it, and I decided to poison everybody, and because I did it, it means it's good. Having that belief doesn't make it true. And that's a very dangerous thing to have in any society. Yes, you have a freedom of thought, right? And freedom of expression, but when you're articulating these ideas and values in the public sphere, you should be expected to be challenged, right? So if someone makes a claim about something, you assess the claim, right? And that's why I think we should be moral, we should be ethical, which means we should have civility. Civility means I live in a society where there's different people, and I'm being civil about that and engage with you in a civil way. But that doesn't mean now that I can't intellectually engage with you. Even if I say some things that you don't like, or you may even maybe find offensive. We have to risk that in order for us to progress. Otherwise, well, what's the point? And that's why I think on both sides of the spectrum, Muslims, and I would even say atheists and other groups, everyone's becoming a little bit sensitive. In my view, right? I could say that I'm a Brit, yeah, so we're a bit hardcore in that way, yeah? So the point is, I'm a little bit sensitive. I think we should try and, what's very important about dealing with other human beings? What's very important is listening with the intention to understand. And that is very difficult because we don't intend to understand, we intend to refute. Because the immediate response from the conversation is, but. If you said but, you were manufacturing a response while you were listening, so you're not really listening. So the first thing is, listen with the intention to understand. The second point is, and this is very powerful, is that you listen out for. You listen out for their context, which means search for their meaning, don't search for their words. Because words are vehicles to meaning. The words they use, you may attribute a different meaning in context. But you're not connecting with them, you're just connecting with your own ego that way. Really search for their context and their meaning, which should require you to say sometimes, what do you mean by that? When someone says to me, Hamza, what did you mean by that? That's it, I've fallen in love with you. Because one of my weaknesses is the fear of being misunderstood. So you say, what do you mean by that? Like, wow, you want to know me, you really want to know me. You're not going to just attach to my words and you've given a particular meaning to it. You're seeking out their context. The third thing, which is about powerful communication and discourse, is communicate and with the power to create. What does that mean? Say I'm engaging with Sorry? With Yolanda. I am engaging with Yolanda, okay? And and say we're having some difficulty in that engagement. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to listen out for the best human being in the world. I'm going to listen out for the most sincere human being in the world. I'm going to listen out for the most intelligent human being in the world. I'm going to listen out for the most compassionate human being in the world. And not only am I going to listen out for that, I'm going to communicate with her as if she is that. And I'm telling you, you'll create something. I'm telling you. And this was for me, in my view, the prophetic way of doing things. The Prophet Muhammad, upon his peace, would say to the butcher of the Muslims at that time, Khalid bin Walid, he was a butcher. He literally slaughtered people. He said, how can a wise man not accept the truth, not accept Islam? He created from him. You know, he was listening out for the wise person, communicate to him as if he is wise, and then he became wise. Right? That's very powerful. But it's hard to do. That's it. But if you do that, it'll be amazing. Anyway, let's go to the second part of the presentation. Sorry, because I think time's running. So we're going to go to the second part of the presentation. So, we've done the first part about truth and survival, cognitive faculties, etc. Now, I want to talk about something very powerful, which I think is a really good argument for God's existence. And this argument I like to call the Quranic argument for God's existence. Yes, I've mentioned the word Quran. You don't have to believe in the Quran to accept this argument. It's a kind of universal argument, but it's motivated by certain verses in the Quran. And they're universal in terms of their fundamental logic or concept. The Quran says in chapter 52, verse 35 to 36, did you come from nothing? Did you create yourself? Did you create the heavens and the earth? Indeed, you have no certainty. So what's very interesting here, primarily these verses are addressing the human being. But because the word khuliqu in Arabic is used, which means something that came into existence, you could apply the logic of these explanations, these potential explanations, to anything that began, to anything that had a beginning. So from this perspective, we could apply the logic of these verses to the universe if we can show that the universe had a beginning. Now, I don't want to focus too much on this point, that could be your own homework, but there are an array of arguments, mathematical, philosophical, and some would argue empirical. I don't like the empirical evidence because it's undetermined. What does undetermination mean? It means there are 17 different models to explain the same data, so good luck with that. We all say the Big Bang, but the Big Bang is like a colloquial term now for 17 different models, and many of them have the same epistemic weight. You don't believe me? Check it out for yourself in academia. So, point is, let's assume that the universe had a beginning, and we can address that in the Q&A. So since the universe had a beginning, well, the Quran is talking about the human being that had a beginning, and you could apply the logical explanations to anything that had a beginning. So what is the Quran saying? Well, let's break it down. So it was in chapter 52, verse 35 to 36, right? And the Quran says, did you come from nothing? So nothing is an explanation here, potential explanation. Did you create yourself? So self-created is an explanation, or self-caused. You could use words like self-caused, right? Then the Quran says, or did you create the heavens and the earth? Now the logic of this is, it was created by something else created, right? And the final explanation, obviously, because it's in the Quran, it says, you have no certainty, meaning that there is an uncreated creator, right? Which is the whole point of these verses, to articulate and show that there is an uncreated creator. Right. Creator. Apologies for my handwriting. Blame computers. Right. So, what I want to do is intellectually just go through these logical explanations and to see if they're even valid. So, the universe had a beginning. Can it be explained that the universe came from nothing? But what do we mean by nothing here? What we mean by nothing is like a universal negation. What we mean by nothing is the absence of anything, which means no potential and no prior causal conditions. Now, I would argue any normal human being would never say the universe came from nothing by virtue of what we just discussed what nothing means. However, you have some people saying, hold on a second, Hamza. You have particles in the quantum vacuum that emerge from the quantum vacuum. That's evidence that something, the particle, came from nothing, the quantum vacuum. However, there's a play on words here. The quantum vacuum or the quantum field or the quantum haze, whatever you want to call it, is not nothing. It is something. You're visible. The universe is considered still something physical. Even Professor Lawrence Krauss, my age-old buddy interlocutor, right? He wrote a book, The Universe from Nothing, or A Universe from Nothing. Again, his nothing is no time and space, but in physics, these are physical notions, and when you remove them, there's still some physical stuff there. That's why Krauss would say in his lecture, something, so he would say nothing is something. It's just a play on words. You know, we need to not do linguistic gymnastics, right? Because it's equivalent of me saying, you know what, last night I had a great dinner, and it was nothing, right? Or, you know, I don't know, nothing tastes great with a bit of maple syrup. So, and what's interesting here is, saying that the universe comes from nothing, the logical equivalent is saying that if you were to close your eyes right now, so let's imagine we'll close our eyes, count to 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, open your eyes, and this building's disappeared, and we should be okay by saying that it doesn't require any explanation. That nothing is the explanation for the disappearance of this building. That's the logical equivalent. But who dared to say such a thing? It's reductio ad absurdum, as we say in Latin. It reduces things to absurdity. So, any healthy human being would say, this is not an option. Right, next option. Or maybe, Hamza, the universe created itself. Again, is this logical? This means that the universe had power to create before it existed. That's what it means. Even the classical scholar Abu Sulaiman al-Khattabi, he makes this point. How can something create anything if it doesn't have the power to create? Right? He says something like that. So the point is, self-creation is not possible. It's equivalent of me saying, can your mother give birth to herself? Right? And also, from a logical point of view, it's like saying something existed and didn't exist at the same time. Because if something self-create, it means it once wasn't there in order to be created, but yet it was there before it was there. Doesn't make sense, right? So the next option is, well, maybe the universe was created by something else created. No problem. But is this an ultimate explanation? Is this an ultimate explanation? Because if we say this universe was created by something else that was created, like another universe, then what created that universe? Another universe. Hold on a second. If that's created as well, what created that universe? Another universe. And what created that universe? Another universe. If that goes on forever, we would never have the universe today. It will be impossible because of the absurdity of the infinite regress of causes. Not events, of causes. It's equivalent of me basically wanting to give you a gift, but before I give you a gift, I have to get the causal power to give you that gift from Yolanda. And Yolanda has to get the causal power to give me causal power to give you the gift from Troy. What a name. What a name. From Troy. Right? This is Sparta, man. Yeah? From Troy. I'm Greek, I'm allowed to say those things. Yeah? Greek that looks thoroughly Pakistani, right? So, yes, from Troy. And if that goes on forever, you would never get the gift. So, the universe couldn't be ultimately explained by something else that was created. Then we're left with the most logical explanation that there is an uncreated creator, which makes sense of God. This is the most simple argument. I've used it with some of the most greatest minds on this planet, Professor Lawrence Krauss, and many other people, and you can just watch it for yourself. Yes, I've done lots of mistakes, everyone's on a journey, but at the end of the day, there was no undercutting defeated to this argument. If there is one, I'd like to hear from you today. This is evidence that there is an uncreated creator, and it's rational, intuitive, and makes sense. Just to conclude, Islam is not just based on the fact that you affirm there's an uncreated creator. You have to take that logical, intellectual, existential, spiritual leap. What's that leap? That this creator is worthy of worship. And let me just conclude on this point. If there's an uncreated creator, then he created us and our lives. Aren't our lives priceless? Aren't they priceless? Right? But it's given freely, right? If I told you you had 10 minutes left to live, but you have to give me, but in order to get another 10 days, you have to give me all of your wealth. You'll give me all of your wealth. Such is the priceless nature of life. Yet it's freely, all these moments in our existence are freely given to us. We don't earn them, we don't own them, and we don't necessarily deserve them. But yet they're freely given to us. And if that's the case, we should be grateful. Grateful for the most basic thing. Forget having a car and a wife and children or a spouse or whatever the case may be. Just life and the potential to live it. We should be so grateful because it's priceless, it's free, and we receive it every moment and we don't necessarily earn, own, or deserve it. And if it's true that something gives you something so priceless for free at every moment of your existence that you don't earn, own, or deserve, then you should be in a state of gratitude. And that's why gratitude in Islam is a key to worship. That's why in the first line of the first chapter, the Quran says, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All perfect thanks and praise and gratitude belong to the Lord of everything that exists. So, I think this is a powerful, intuitive, nice argument. By the way, there are many arguments for God's existence. But like I said, maybe a rational argument is not going to awaken the truth within. It could be getting you a pizza. God bless you. Thank you very much for listening.
Before
Yeah, absolutely.
before we do Q&A,
Since there's only 4 logical explanations, if there's any others, let me know. Since there's only 4 logical explanations, and the 3 explanations actually do not make any sense at all, and this actually makes sense, then we accept something that makes sense. And coming back to the first point, they're not the same because nothing is the absence of anything, including potential, any kind of causal activity or conditions. The creator, or the concept of a creator, or an uncreated creator, is not an absence of anything because it is an entity from that point of view. The second question, why can't you have an infinite regress of causes? Lots of thought experiments that you can articulate for this. I tried to do one already, let me try to give you another one to make more sense of it. Imagine, for example, I go to the bus and I give them a $100 note, and it only costs $1, he has to give me $99, and he says, I can't give you that. I have to basically get permission from my boss. He calls his boss, and his boss says, you know what, I can't give you permission either, it's so much change, I have to go to my boss. If that were to go on forever, I would never get my change. So this is another thought experiment to highlight and indicate the absurdity of the infinite regress of causes. Now don't confuse this with mathematics, yeah? Because one would argue, well, mathematics can show infinities, but this is different because we're talking about infinite regress of causes. One thing gaining its causal power of another thing ad infinitum. We're not here debating the notion of does infinity exist or not. That's a different idea. There are different conceptions of infinity. You have the undifferentiated conception of the eternal or the infinite, which is not a problem for Muslims per se. But then you have the other conception, which is a conception of an infinity that's made out of discrete parts, which is a philosophical problem. I would argue that doesn't exist. That's why in the philosophy of maths, if we were to study it, they have assumptions. You have to start with some assumptions in mathematics. And one of the assumptions, I think it's in set theory or something, check it for yourself, it says infinity exists. They have to start with that assumption in order for the rest of the mathematics to work. So yeah, that's my answer to those 2 questions.
The first 3 points, I could argue with 2, but let's assume that you didn't completely right. You got number 4, and you said that's a logical conclusion. No, it's not a logical conclusion. It's an assumption that you made. I cannot understand why, when we don't know the answers just yet, that we get to the God did it equation. In the past, every time when we do a new discovery, we have moved away from that and said, now we know. We don't know several nature laws yet. Energy might have always existed for a long time, comes in different forms. We know mass is a form of energy, but there might be lots of discoveries just coming where we can find out. But because we haven't found out yet, it's not a logic conclusion that it must be God. An uncreated creator, that would mean that there would be no nothing, because there would have been the uncreated creator already. So
I think we need to understand what logical conclusion means, yeah? Just because we don't like something, it doesn't mean it's not a logical conclusion, yeah? So, what we mean by logical conclusion is, if we have these possible explanations, and these explanations are false, right? Then we can say this is the most logical, given the fact that philosophically, the idea of something being created with something uncreated is not philosophically absurd. So to say it's illogical really is not understanding what you mean by logical. That's the first thing. The second thing is, this has nothing to do with science. This transcends science. You could bring any science you want into this.
it's a philosophy.
Yeah, it's a philosophy. So good.
Not science.
Yeah, good. Yeah, but the science has no say. So if it has no say, science can't talk about God.
But you're trying to use science to argue your point.
No, or not, because nothing was a metaphysical concept. Idea of self-created is a metaphysical concept. Infinite regress of impossibility of causes is a metaphysical philosophical concept. These are philosophical concepts. So if I were to, I would never use a scientific argument to prove or disprove God. You know why? Because science can't do that. And I specialize in the philosophy of science, so let me just give you some references for you to read. Because sometimes we rely on like apologists like Richard Dawkins and others who have zero training in philosophy. They don't stay in their lane. You're a biologist. Don't become a philosopher. Stick to your biology, okay? The reason I'm saying this with passion because his new book, which is supposed to be a non-fiction book, it's actually a fiction book, yeah? It's for you. What's it called? It's called
God something.
yeah, God for Young People or something, or Outgrowing God. Yeah, I think we need to outgrow Dawkins, man. It's just a really badly worded book, and it's
God delusion is what it is.
That was the first one.
yeah, absolutely. No, there's a new one. It's called Outgrowing God. God delusion is even worse. So the point is, when it comes to science, my friend, science cannot prove or disprove God. Okay? Generally speaking, science has to adopt methodological naturalism. It's not always the case, but as a general rule, it adopts methodological naturalism. What is methodological naturalism? This is different from philosophical naturalism. Methodological naturalism basically says, for something to be a scientific conclusion, don't talk about God. That's what it says. Muslims appreciate that. Let's do the science, let the science speak for itself. You don't have to say God did it. The Islamic history is proof of that, right? Because if you didn't have Islam, you wouldn't have the computer. You'd still be like using these boards, yeah? Because the algorithm came from the Islamic civilization, right? So this case in point historically. So there's no problem with science. We love science, yeah? We have a very healthy, loving relationship with science, yeah? However, we have to understand science as it is. It has a scope. As the atheist philosopher Elliot Sober in his essay Empiricism says, at any moment in time, scientists are restricted to the observations they have at hand. You can't observe God by definition. He's outside of the universe, he's a metaphysical concept.
And doesn't exist.
No, that's not true, because there's a knowledge claim that you require evidence. But it doesn't exist. You didn't see your great-great-great-grandmother. She never existed. This is shallow empiricism, guys.
But the only form of proof we have to prove that something exists or not is to use the scientific method.
Not true. That's scientism. It's been refuted by everybody, any decent academic on this planet. Scientism, let me finish. Listen to me. I want you to listen with intent to understand. Alright? Listen to my context. Let's not argue. Because you need to appreciate that there are academic concepts you're talking about that are very outdated. And I want you to explore that for yourself. I'm not going to impose that on you, but I want you to do your own reading. Scientism, that the only method we have to formulate truths about the world and reality is the scientific method, is something called scientism. Scientism is absolutely flawed, and I'm going to explain to you why it's flawed. Even scientists think it's flawed. Let me explain. Number one, scientism is self-refuting. Because to make the claim that the only way to formulate truths about the world is through the scientific method cannot be proven with the scientific method. You're making a truth claim. The only way we can formulate truths about the world is through the scientific method, cannot be proven by the scientific method. It's like you're shooting yourself in intellectual thought, yeah? That's the first point.
It's also a false claim, though, because no scientist claims that.
Thank you. That's exactly what I'm trying to articulate for you right
So
now.
when you're making a claim of exactly that nature.
No, I'm just responding to your claim that you said the only method to use is the scientific method to formulate truths about the world of reality. That's a false claim. So the second point I want to address is this. Scientism is false, meaning that it can't explain everything. For example, it cannot explain mathematical truths. You need mathematical, logical truths before you do science. Science has no say in logical truths. You need them before you have science, like deductive arguments, right? That's required in some science. Or induction. Those thinking processes are required before you do any science. In actual fact, to make any scientific conclusion, you need to make an inference, right? The rules of inference and all of these things cannot be proven by the scientific method. They're required by the scientific method. So that proves that science is not the only thing to use to understand the world of reality, because logic itself can't be proven by science. Next point, morality. If you believe that there are objective moral truths in the world, meaning that outside of the limited mind and human emotions, which most decent human beings believe at least one moral truth is objective, like killing innocent people. If you believe that is objective, that cannot be grounded with the scientific method, because the only thing we have at our disposal at the moment is the Darwinian mechanism. And if morals came from that, then they're no longer objective. They're just a kind of random reaction to certain biological conditions. Even Darwin had this problem. He talked about the beehives. He said, if we were precisely, reared under precisely the same conditions as the beehives, we would think it's morally okay to kill our fertile daughters. Now, by extension, if you protract that, look at the nurse shark. If you go to the National Geographic, the nurse shark bites the fin of its mate and wrestles with its mate. That is tantamount to rape. And if we were reared under precisely the same conditions as a nurse shark, then we would think it's okay to do that to our spouses, which obviously we don't believe to be true. So, from a meta-ethical, moral ontology, the basis of morals, meaning that it talks about where they came from and explaining their objective nature, biology can't really justify that. So if you're a moral realist in some way, even if you believe one moral is objective in the way that we just discussed, science has no say. But yes, science can formulate positions, so we can see if something produces well-being or produces suffering, but this is not moral ontology, it's moral epistemology, how to get to know what morals are, the basis of morals. Another thing, science cannot justify or take into account what makes us human. For example, I did this for my thesis for my master's, which is the hard problem of consciousness. The very fact that we have inner subjective conscious states. When I have an orange juice, when I fall in love, right, it's an inner subjective conscious state. And that inner subjective conscious state cannot be known or accessed. It's a first-person fact. Science is a third-person reality. You can't access inner subjective conscious states using the scientific method. Because if you were to map out everything in your brain, all the neurochemicals activities, it doesn't follow that I know what it's like for you to have a hot chocolate on a Sunday. You know, because you experience. I know what it's like for me, but I will never know what it's like for you in an internal sense. Unless you're willing to be an unlimited materialist and say we don't have internal subjective states, which would be an absurd position in my view, neuroscience can't deal with that. Read the works of David Papiniu. He says neuroscience is epistemologically limited from that point of view. I could go on and on and on to show the limitations of science, and it's not to reduce science to nothing, because we respect it, but it's to allow science to speak for itself. So let me give you some academic references. Number one, Samuel Okasha. Yes, he sounds like a very foreign name, but he's a professor, yeah? Introduction to the philosophy of science, I believe. A brief introduction to philosophy of science. Hugh Gotch, okay? Although Hugh Gotch does say that maybe you could use scientific data to use arguments against God, but they're not scientific arguments anymore, they become philosophical evidential arguments, yeah? Read Hugh Gulch, he wrote The Scientific Method in Brief, which is used in academia in Britain. Read the works of Professor Elliot Sober. Read the works of Michael Rules, an atheist, yeah? Read the works of, and this is enough. Check these out. If you don't want to read it, then come back to me. But the position, and I say this, try to say this as humbly as possible, of scientism, that science is the only thing we have to understand the world of reality, really throws history in the bin, because you can't prove it scientifically, philosophy is in the bin, mathematics is in the bin, a lot of moral ontology is in the bin, consciousness, a lot of consciousness is in the bin, what else is in the bin? So that position is not respected by any decent academic that I know of, and do your research for yourself.
We have a question here.
Philosophy is not science.
That's a philosophical statement. To say philosophy is rubbish, philosophical science is a philosophical statement. You can't run away from philosophy. Guys, look, yeah. I'm going to be very honest with you, just as a human being. Don't adopt the rhetoric of people on YouTube. Please, I used to do it, and it doesn't work. It's painful. Honestly, let's grow, guys. Don't adopt the rhetoric of people on YouTube when they talk about philosophy is rubbish. You guys don't know what you're talking about. Come on, let's just get. If we study science, okay, who knows the philosophical assumptions of science? Science doesn't have philosophical assumptions. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. For example, number one, that there are external causal connections in the universe. If you study any basic level of Western intellectual endeavors, they haven't figured out what is the nature of the causal link yet. But you have to adopt the fact that there are external causal connections in order for you to understand the world of reality. Science can't prove that, but you need to have that as an assumption. Another assumption of science, any scientist, philosopher, or scientist worth their salt will tell you this. Let me tell you, they'll tell you this. One key assumption of science is that nature is uniform. Nature is uniform. If you do not have that assumption, you will never have any decent theory. Because when you have a set of data, yes, it's always limited data, and you develop a theory, and it's well-confirmed theory, you can never say that theory applies to all of the phenomena related to the theory. If you didn't have the assumption that nature is uniform. And if you had the other assumption that nature is not uniform, you never have any progress in science. That is a philosophical assumption. So we can't say, philosophy is rubbish, this is science, you philosophers, what do you do for us, blah, 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 blah. It's rhetoric, it's YouTube-ish, it's frankly, come on, I'm saying this out of pure love and respect because I adopted stuff like this, we all grow, and I'm saying you don't adopt the false arguments of YouTube people, let's do our own reading, and when you go to, and this is the reading of people who consider themselves atheists as well, right? So science has a hell of a lot of philosophical baggage, and there's no problem with that.
I wish we had more time.
We're going to continue on.
Yes.
We're going to have a little bit more time.
4 things. First 2 are 2 compliments. The last 2 are basically questions. The first 2 are compliments. So number 4, not creative. That's another golden nugget that you've given us to put in our pockets to share with an atheist. I don't find it very difficult anymore at 60 years of age.
Well, you look much younger, if I have to say so myself.
To explain to an atheist rationality. That example is excellent, and I'll explain why in a minute. It's another gold nugget possibly for you. The second model on the left board, you're right. I believe world religions are the cloud. I believe in a creator more today because I got rid of world religions, all of them. Here's why. That clock up there didn't randomly evolve. Someone created that clock. And that clock is empirically capable of measuring time. Number 2, I can go outside tonight like the rest of you. And you can go look at Ursa Major, look north. It will revolve around the North Star in 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4.09 seconds. Counterclockwise. Every day, 365.25 solar year, which equates to 364 days of time. And if you read the Quran and other writings, that's a very important thing. That's what's called, it's empirical. You can measure it, it duplicates itself. So, the question that I have, and then I'll go to number 4 to close if that's okay.
Sure.
When you said that there was no link for survival to truth, the one thing that I was told when I brought that up in my past was called the 3 rules of life. On average, 3 minutes without air, we all die. 3 days without hot water, on average, we die. 3 weeks without food, on average, we die. And that empirical fact has stayed true for all 110 billion lives that have come and gone before us. So that's an empirical truth. So no argument, I don't think, not one atheist has ever argued these things. So in my travels in Asia, the Middle East, South America, and Europe, it really holds true, these things. But this one tonight, number 4, is huge. It's a gold nugget, and I thank you for it. Because in the science of empirical etymology, the Creator's name, the 4 letters, means I am He that is self-existent. I will forever be thankful for you for sharing number 4 with me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, you know where you got that from?
No.
From the Quran.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Ladies and gentlemen, brothers, sisters, friends.
Hi, first I want to thank you for this speech. For me, science is just a way of understanding the whole Earth or universe, and religion is also another way. So for me, all religion is more or less same, and I have nothing against it. But you see, as human beings evolve or evolution, so we keep on changing our beliefs. Like science, we keep on making mistakes. Even right now, we maybe can say the science actually is 99% wrong, and we only have the 1% correct. Or maybe you can say 0.0001% correct. So, as for me, religions also should be same. Like most of the religion they founded like 2,000 years ago. So why have no you cannot, if you say one thing is perfect, no flaw, I cannot buy it. But I didn't see any upgrade of bug effect from Hindu man.
Yeah.
So what Islam have done for the last 2,000 years?
That's a good point. What has Islam done for the last 2,000 years? No, see, religion, Islam is not like an iPhone. So you don't have iPhone 1, iPhone 2, iPhone 3. Let me just a few things. There's a hell of a lot to unpack in that question, which is a very valid question. Let's unpack some of them. Let's take it from a moral point of view. Now, obviously, from an Islamic point of view, we believe in a source of morality, which is the Quran, the prophetic teachings. But we also are taught through the Quran, the prophetic teachings, principles to understand the moral virtues and the ethics in the Quran and the prophetic teachings. These principles are timeless because when you apply these principles over time, sometimes the rulings may change based on the moral variables. So we have a very detailed moral philosophy and jurisprudence. So the reason that Islam has stood the test of time from a moral point of view, from a legal point of view, from an ethical point of view, is because it was a heavily principle-based religion that gives you principles that you can apply over time to different times and places. And that's something very unique about the Islamic discourse. The other thing that you mentioned about what has Islam done in the past 1400 years, well, it's done a hell of a lot actually. Like, for example, for you to even use your iPhone, you would not have the iPhone if the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, didn't exist. Let me just show you the link to this, yeah? So let me just repeat. If you, an atheist, listen to this one, I want you to tell your atheist friends, alright? Do it over tea, coffee, and maybe these days in Canada, some marijuana. Not that I suggest you do that, but it's legal here, so. Basically, this iPhone, right, in order for it to function, requires an algorithm of some sort, right? So the algorithm was the product of a Muslim, and the Muslim was as a result of a social political space, and that social political space was generally speaking governed by Islam, and Islam facilitated people to look into the interconnecting principles of nature. And those ethics to allow people to look into the interconnecting principles of nature came from the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace. So if they didn't exist, maybe we would never have an iPhone, right? So for me, there's a hell of a lot what Islam is responsible for, yeah? The other thing is that Islam has been responsible for, an amazing civilization that has created, a lot of tolerance. Yes, I don't like to glorify our history. Someone who over glorifies history, that's the product of a defeated mind. There's been lots of mistakes, lots of issues for sure. But I think a lot of the goodness that you look into history, especially Islamic history, when Europe, and we're descendants of Europeans in some way or form, other peoples, Europe at that time was really entrenched in some form of intellectual darkness. But the Islamic tradition revived. If you look at Islamic Spain, for example, read the works of Thomas Arnold, he argues that Islamic Spain became the kind of milestone that helped Europe propel itself into the Renaissance. Because when the Christians took over Spain again, what happened is that they came and they looked at all the manuscripts on astronomy and physics and all of these things, and they took it back to Europe, and that propelled them to move forward into the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, all of those things. And that's directly linked to the kind of intellectual heritage of the Islamic civilization. For example, even our Jewish brothers and sisters, they would know this. Maimonides, Musa bin Maimun, he was a Jewish philosopher, if you like. He used to write in Arabic. He's considered the second Moses in the Jewish tradition because he was the product of what you call the convivencia, which was the coexistence that existed in Islamic Spain. And that coexistence was between Jews, Christians, and Muslims. In actual fact, this is unprecedented. This didn't happen in most civilizations, right, at that time. Now, I'm not saying we have a monopoly on ethics. No, that'd be a really silly thing to say. But there's something good there, Unfortunately, these days, Muslims get a bad name, but, let's allow history to speak for itself. And I would argue a lot of rulings that you have in the British system, and by extension, the Western system, a lot of these things actually were derived from Islamic jurisprudence, like on social law, on things to do with, this was painful. Social laws, things to do with like even freedom of speech, would you believe it? Oh yeah, let's put that in our pipe and smoke it. Yeah, freedom of speech. If you read the academic paper published in 1980s, I believe, by Marcel Boissard, he makes an argument that says, I think the title is called, from what I remember, on the probable influence of Islam, the presumption of innocence. And he quotes, he looks into Louis IX that traveled to the East and met a monk, and that monk recited or taught him a principle that could be found in the Islamic tradition. Before that time, to be proven innocent, right? Would you believe it? You had to fight a duel. If you won, you're innocent. Or you'd be burnt alive. If you survived, you're innocent. Right? This doesn't happen in Islam because we have the presumption of innocence. So there's laws, there's science, there's progress, there's an influence of influencing other civilizations. In actual fact, we will not have Plato today. You will not have philosophy. You will not have even some of the natural sciences because the Muslims preserved the Greek heritage, right? It continued that intellectual progress. When Europe at that time were burning those books, right? The Muslims translated them. How do you think Europe accessed Greek philosophy? How do you think that happened? It's because of the Muslims, right? Where are your friends, man? Where are your friends? Yeah? So the point is, if you know what Islam has done, well, Islam has done all of this. So I could go on, I could continue. And there's so many more things we could talk about, right? And although you're right though, the Muslim world today is not in a great place. The kind of intellectual activity from the Muslim world is not a great place. But that for me is not fundamentally based on Islamic principles. Because those principles have shown, there's evidence, we have a lengthy CV to show how they've been applied and used effectively. But I think this is due to just politics, man. It's politics. Dictators, oppressors. What can we do? Done? Let's take a few more. We've got time. Take yourself. Yeah.
First of all, I just wanted to thank you for your sharing with us today. There's definitely you mentioned a couple times about your algorithm. I'd love to do a little more reading about that. Is there a name of the algorithm I should look at?
No, the basis for the notion of algorithms, not an algorithm itself, came from the Islamic tradition. His name was Al-Khwarizmi. Check it out, Al-Khwarizmi. Is that correct? Yeah, Musa. Yeah, I think his name was Moses. So Musa Al-Khwarizmi. Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. You know what? Let's go to our friend called Google. The spelling's on there. Let me show you. Okay, so you spell his name. Okay, his name is Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. So it's Al-Khwarizmi. Right? No worries. Anyone else? Someone new. You.
Assalamu alaikum. I think we can agree that there's a vast difference between ought to be or should be versus is. Let's assume that today, after wrestling with many complex arguments and different points, let's say that today 50 people ponder upon these arguments and they come to a conclusion or they say that, perhaps there should be a God. However, my question is, how does one reach the state of there is a God? Because there is a vast difference between ought to be versus is.
Yeah, well, it depends who they are. If you're looking for like the argument that is like this kind of the divine algorithm for guidance, you can never access that. Every human being makes conclusions based on their own reality. That's why if you study philosophy, you could give someone the best argument in the world that is so watertight, but when you go to advanced philosophy, you're trained to tweak premises around and to actually change someone's conclusion. I mean, I followed Al-Ghazali, the 11th century theologian, when he talked about you're never going to be fully convinced just based on an argument. If people think that your full conviction will come from an argument, that is an intellectual innovation in our tradition, because the human being is not just a brain. I mean, for example, from an Islamic discourse point of view, the Creator talks about what the human being is. The human being is a ruh, is a soul. The human being is a qalb, is a heart. The human being has an aql, and they say the aql, the intellect, is a function of the heart. We are also a nafs, and we have a fitra. So even if you gave someone the best argument in the world that's watertight that there is a God, that might not even be enough for them because they have other things going on. So we shouldn't be under any, what I call a spiritually and intellectually immature assumption that you've got the best argument in the world and that he's going to be convinced. That never worked in history. Yeah, it's not even part of our tradition. This is like it's a new age phenomenon that treats the human being like a computer. Yeah, and human beings are not computers, frankly. But I think this shows is though, in my view. Yeah, if someone's sincere, this is, man. So I hope I got the meaning of your question. If not, we could discuss after. Yeah, thank you. But
Sorry, I'll be as quick as I can.
Yeah, sure.
There's a part in the Quran I found, it's partway through a chapter, in English it's called The Whole Story. And the pagans challenge Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may peace be upon him, that the Torah and the Quran are too much alike, and we think they're trickery and magic, and we reject it. And then Allah says to him to say to them that if they have something better and it's they're sincere and they have convincing proofs, then show us and we'll follow you. And he says if they don't, then they're following their own desires, and those who follow their own desires are the most misled, or Yeah, so basically if you have the best evidence you have to try to follow God, then that's the best thing you have. And if somebody can bring you something better, then you would follow that, obviously. And that's the whole, is God real? Well, if you have something better, then if he is or isn't, then it would have to be provided with evidence.
Okay, that's a good point. On that note, let's conclude, because There's so much more to talk about God, to talk about why He's worthy of worship, to talk about Islam, specifically the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace. These things we take conversation. So here's my advice. Listen with the intention to understand. Try and connect with one another to understand one another sincerely. There's some free literature and material for you to take to start to understand these concepts in a more simple way, and maybe in a more profound way, and different ideas about why we believe the Quran is from God, why we believe the Prophet Muhammad is the final prophet. A little book on God's names, His beautiful names to, engage with your heart. Some amazing things here, but there's nothing more. Interact with them, discuss with them, break bread with them, try to understand them, let them try to understand you. And if that's what you've achieved today, then I've done my job. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good evening.